Hello, my name is Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss fantasy Formula 1. The Azerbaijan Grand Prix has concluded after what was probably the most difficult decision of the year, and I ended up on the right side of it, and I'm so sorry if you did not. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, where have you been? It's been everywhere on Twitter, it's been everywhere on YouTube in the F1 fantasy sphere, and that was of course the decision of whether or not to final fix this weekend for Azerbaijan. Let's talk about what happened, why it worked, why it didn't work, why it was such a close call, and then see what my plans are for Singapore this weekend. And of course, as always, I'm going to be doing another deadline stream on Saturday, usual time, 2 hours before the deadline, 2 hours before qualifying. So just look up when qualifying is and be here in the stream on the channel 2 hours before then to, answer all your questions, last minute questions from free practice, yada yada, and then discuss any final fix opportunities afterwards. My God, what a week in Azerbaijan was. Let's talk about it. So for the second week in a row, and for only the second time since, Spain, I have a blue arrow up, 2,551. It was a good weekend for me. I'm now up to 13,199, getting closer to that 10k goal of mine. And all of that came because I did not final fix Lando Norris out. The decision was such a 50-50. If you don't remember, Lando Norris starting from P15, how much could he overtake? That was always the discussion. And I made an entire video about it. So if you didn't see that video, I'm just going to quickly sort of catch you up what the decision was. Well, it was, do I final fix Lando Norris out for Charles Leclerc? And many of you were in a similar situation with either Leclerc or Piastri. Some of you sat with Lando Leclerc, some of you sat with Lando Piastri, and the question was, do you final fix it out? And the consensus that I came to at that video was that I thought Lando Norris would end up about P7, getting a total of roughly 20 points in the race. This is in the race, not in like qualifying. Don't forget to remove the qualifying points when thinking about this. And that Leclerc, if he got second, which I thought was like worst case scenario, maybe he would go down to third, but worst case scenario, non-DNF, Leclerc would get also about 20 points. But I also put Lando Norris as having a very high likelihood of getting fastest lap due to him being last of Formula A, if that makes sense. Now, he ended up not being last of Formula A because Hamilton took an engine penalty and started from the pit lane, but that starting from the pit lane is slightly different. And Lando Norris had a good start for once, and I mean, literally everything that could have gone right for me went right for me. I ended up not doing it. The reason why I ended up not doing was it was such a 50-50 decision, and I did think, an hour before the race, when I made the decision, that Oscar Piastri would come out on top over Charles Leclerc. And I was correct, although it was so close. And honestly, it could have been either or, but I just had this gut feeling that Leclerc would lose the pole position again, and Oscar Piastri would end up winning. So it was a gut feeling on Piastri winning. And also, if I didn't do it, I thought that, okay, well, if Leclerc ends up winning, he's going to get roughly 35-ish points. And Lando Norris, I do think he's in a good opportunity. He's in a good spot to get roughly 20 points and then a 10-point fastest lap, finishing the race in 7th. Now that Hamilton was behind him and he wouldn't, go up to only 8th, he would be 7th. And well, before the DNF, before the crazy second to last lap incident between Checo and Sainz, Lando was 6th. He managed to make it past. Max Verstappen as well, which I did not expect him to be able to do, but he did that as well. And he had the fastest lap locked down. So ultimately, it ended up being almost exactly what I predicted. Leclerc in second place with those 20 points or so that he got, and then Lando getting 6th, one position more than I thought, being on a solid 28-point score. And then, the crash happened, and it became a massive swing in the favor of those who did not final fix. So I would have already been correct if the final fix, didn't happen. But in that case, I would have been, I would have lost more if Leclerc had actually won. Now it didn't even matter that Leclerc didn't win. If Leclerc had won, it still would have been the correct decision to not final fix Norris, just because of that crash between Checo and Sainz. So very, very lucky, but I sort of protect myself from the lucky accusations by saying I was correct even if the DNF didn't happen. The crash didn't happen. Even if that didn't happen, I still made the correct decision. But the decision ended up being a massive swing in one side or the other. And those of you who did end up final fixing for Ferrari, for the Ferrari asset, for Leclerc, ended up definitely losing out on it. If you final fix for Oscar, it wasn't that big of a deal. It ended up being sort of equal, but you essentially kind of wasted the final fix. And that was also what ended up making, convincing me to keep the decision to not final fix. And that was that it felt like such a 50-50 decision, but one decision was not playing it and keeping it for later. Does that make sense? So the actual reason that made me switch my position, switch my stance, and not final fix Norris out was that it was such a 50-50 decision. There were so many things that could go wrong, and I could keep my final fix for later. Now, I've seen some concern over, will you even use the final fix? When can you actually use the final fix? And overall, the final fix is one of those very, very difficult chips to use. And worst case, I'll just use it on a C-tier asset in like the final race of the season, right? It probably won't net a lot of points, but worst case, I'll just use it final weekend on a single switch. It doesn't even have to be on my 2x driver. It could be on my second premium driver if I just think that one driver has a better, say I'm sitting with Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, and Oscar Piastri starts from 5th, and then Leclerc starts from pole. I can just, switch Piastri to Leclerc for one weekend, even though I don't have the 2x. So it doesn't have to be that ultra effective chip that everyone wants it to be. It can be, and it has been in the past, but right now I think I'm fine with just knowing that worst case, I'm just going to use the final fix final weekend on a small change to hopefully get a few extra points. And until then, I'm only going to use the final fix if it feels obvious, like 100% certain this is the correct decision to make, because I wasn't 100% certain. It was such a 50-50 call, and I mean, it ended up not being the viable play. Now, it definitely could have, but if Lando Norris had stayed 7th, there would have been no DNF, and say that Leclerc had beaten Oscar, Lando would have still been on a solid, 28 points maybe? 26 to 28 points? I don't know exactly. He gained a few extra points in 2 extra positions gained and jumped some points categories, right? When Checo and Sainz crashed. So Lando Norris would have still been on 28 points, and Piastri without the qualifying, Leclerc would have probably been driver of the day if that was the case. He ended up getting 35, 36, 38. Leclerc would have not had the positions gained, so Leclerc would have been on 37. Lando would have been, so it only would have been like a 10-point difference if, what would have been the worst case non-DNF for me. Lando finishing P7, not being able to make it past Max, and then Leclerc actually winning the race over Piastri. It only would have been a 10-point, 20-point with the 2x swing. Whereas now Lando managed to get a massive point score of 38 points in the race, whereas Leclerc got second and didn't get that many points. So overall, very, very lucky. Let's talk about some other assets, some other aspects of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix and how that impacted my team. So we can't, finish talking about my team without talking about the C-tiers. And I think this is the best race for C-tiers all year for my team. I obviously had to sell Logan Sargent. We're going to talk about inactive drivers a bit later. But I had to sell Logan Sargent, so my only actual transfer this weekend was to sell Logan Sargent for Shogun Yu. I specifically picked Shogun Yu because of his grid penalty over Valtteri Bottas, and that ended up being a really, really good switch. Shogun Yu was actually faster than Bottas this weekend. And, just look at those point score. 7, 9, and 12 points, all of them increasing by 0.5 million. Fantastic race for Albon, fantastic race for Colapinto, and yes, I was quite lucky with them too, increasing in position thanks to the DNFs at the end. But even then, I think they would have increased in price. At least Albon would have. But those extra points, I'm very lucky to have them, and I think I was entirely correct in my C-tier assessment in the deadline stream. As for the other C-tiers and the other assets in the game, the average score ended up not being that high. It ended up only being 10.8, which meant that you did not need that many points to increase in price. Hulkenberg 6 points was enough to increase. Ricciardo 2, Bottas 1, obviously no increase. Gasly had a fantastic race, but obviously he got disqualified in the qualifying. So he would have been on 11 race points, but he would have started somewhere else, so you can't really take. But yeah, Gasly owners unlucky. Tsunoda DNFing for the second race in a row after only having one DNF so far this season is very, very unlucky for those who had him. Carlos Sainz, Checo, obviously decreasing after their crash at the end. And then Lance Stroll, let's quickly discuss Lance Stroll. I think Lance Stroll owners were very, very unlucky. I talked about Lance Stroll being a decent option if you switched Magnussen to Lance Stroll. I thought that wasn't a fantastic option. I thought that wasn't that bad of an option. Alonso ended the race in P6. It would have been P8 before that crash at the end. So the pace in the Aston Martin was definitely there to get points. Lance Stroll gets a puncture on lap 1 in the incident with Yuki Tsunoda, and then ends up having to retire the car at the end. Now, he did not get DNF points because he, completed enough of the race, but just massively unlucky for Stroll owners, in my opinion. He could have definitely had a way, way, way better race, but he ended up decreasing in price yet again, which means that we might see Lance Stroll in some teams going forward. Now let's quickly discuss the inactive drivers. So Logan Sargent, inactive drivers, that change was massively controversial, but I ultimately think they ended up making the correct decision with, making inactive drivers, unable to be kept in teams. The Logan Sargent loophole was closed. And I do think that was the correct decision to close it immediately. I don't think it should have been available to start with, but it was, but now it's gone. The surprising thing about it, we obviously knew they would get minus 25 points, but the surprising thing is that they decreased in price. Now, Kevin Magnussen was inactive because of his ban. Obviously, Ole Behrman was in the car instead of him, and Kevin Magnussen ended up decreasing 0.2 million after his negative 25 points. And the same goes for Sargent. Sargent also decreased 0.2 million after getting negative 25 points. And that is something I was not expecting. I knew a couple of people who went into Azerbaijan with Logan Sargent still in their team using the no negative chip to sort of, squeeze a bit of value out of the Logan Sargent asset one more time. The good thing for those strategists is that actually worked. So Logan Sargent's negative 25 points was, just removed. He was just a 0-point asset again for them, which meant that they had an extra race, sort of an extra weekend to gather up some free transfers so they can restructure their team in Singapore. But their Logan Sargent asset decreased 0.2 million, and now, especially with Zhou Guanyu increasing 0.5 million, that's a 0.7 million swing right there from the cheapest asset to the second cheapest non-Colapinto asset. That might make it really, really difficult because a lot of the Logan Sargent teams already had Colapinto in them, so it might make it more difficult to switch to them now. Kevin Magnussen decreasing in price for like the third time this season makes him a better option, in my opinion. 12.6 million is not that bad, but he's at a difficult price point to afford unless you're super, super rich. So surprising that inactive drivers are decreasing in price, but now we know that they're an even bigger detriment to our fantasy teams, and they have to be removed. The second interesting thing, and I don't still understand exactly how this works. I'm just scrolling through my Discord channel, link in the description below. You should join it. What happened here? Why is Behrman negative 1.7 million? He was listed at 15 million. And I don't know anyone that actually bought him because obviously that was a terrible deal. But apparently, like on the back end, he was Magnussen's price at 12.8 million. And then he increased by 0.5 million because he was a C-tier asset. So that's why he's at 13.3 million. So he actually had a 0.5 increase, but it says negative 1.7 because he was displayed as 15 million before. But I don't actually know if you bought him, if he actually cost 15 million. I never even tried this. I never even thought to try this. But something is wrong in the code. Something is definitely displayed incorrectly. So what has happened is that he has gained a 0.5 increase from Magnussen's price to 13.3 million, but it's displayed as negative 1.7 million because he was displayed as a 15 million asset. But I still don't know if people who owned him actually decreased by 1.7 million, because everyone who did own him, he was owned by 1%. Those are inactive teams from back in Saudi Arabia. I don't think anyone actually bought him at 15 million. So I don't think we'll ever get the answer to what actually happened. I've tried to look around. I found no one even on their second teams who bought Ole Behrman just because of how bad of an option he actually was. And if they actually lost 1.7 million or if they gained 0.5. But I suppose we'll never know. If you have any evidence of what actually happened to the Ole Behrman asset, please, comment down below, tweet it at me, because I really, really, really want to know what actually happened here. Did those who owned him lose 1.7 million in value, or did they gain 0.5? Because it looked like if you went in to buy him, it looked like it was 15 million. So did they give you the money back into your cost cap, or what happened? Did he actually cost? Did you need to have 15 million to buy him, or could you buy him at 12.8 million? I don't know. Something went really, really wrong here, and they need to address this and make sure it works. It makes more sense that Oliver Behrman was supposed to be Magnussen's price at 12.8 million. I don't know why he was priced at 15, so at least that's good. But something went terribly wrong here, and this entire inactive drivers in and out, they have to have some sort of plan in place for next year to make sure it doesn't happen again. I thought we needed to quickly discuss Red Bull Racing, because I saw some people say before this weekend that Red Bull was back, Checo looked fast, and Checo did look fast. He looked to have a fantastic race before that incident with Sainz. But after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, information about what has gone wrong with the Red Bull Racing or Red Bull car development has come out. And it apparently traces back to an update they introduced back in the Spanish Grand Prix of 2023. Now, if you don't remember, after that, Max Verstappen went on to win like 9 or 10 races in a row before losing one race, and then went on to win another 9 or 10 races in a row. But they, Christian Horner, and ignore all the ads here, Christian Horner admission is shocking given that Red Bull won every race bar one in 2023. And apparently, that's when Checo started struggling with the car. And what all of this is that Red Bull Racing introduced an issue with the floor, but Max Verstappen is just so good that he outdrove it. He did not mind those issues, right? There was a Grand Prix from which Checo started having problems with the car, but just didn't take it seriously because Max kept winning. Perez, meanwhile, suffered a Q2 exit at Barcelona and could only muster a 4th place finish. Maximum qualifying struggle persisted, limiting him to just 5 podium results in the ensuing 15 races. And all of this, what does this have to do with F1 Fantasy? There's a lot of racing discussions, deep racing discussions you can have about this. But ultimately, I think we need to see proof that the Red Bull works before we can actually go and buy them as assets. I think a lot of people were jumping the gun buying them today and buying them for this race in Azerbaijan. And yes, Checo would have had a decent race as a second place driver, but most people can afford Oscar Piastri or Leclerc as your second driver, and in that case that was already incorrect. So what is the sort of outlook? What is the prognosis with Red Bull? Well, they are bringing more upgrades for Kota to try and win the Drivers' Championship. They've said, Helmut Marko has been on record saying that they've already given up or sort of let go of the Constructors' title, but they're trying to win the Drivers' Championship for Max. I think Red Bull Racing right now is very much a wait and see. We wait and see what happens to them in Kota. Remember, the one race where they had major issues was Singapore last year. So I would not be going out buying Checo or Verstappen or the Red Bull Racing constructor this weekend in Singapore. But I would keep them on the radar for Kota afterwards, see how they perform in practice and maybe then consider it. But for now, and also for Azerbaijan, I think Red Bull Racing were a complete avoid. So if I'm not buying Red Bull Racing assets for Singapore, what is my actual plan? Well, I have 3 transfers available and 0.9 million in the bank. Ferrari ended up being outscored by Mercedes this weekend in Azerbaijan, but that was merely due to the Sainz DNF. If Sainz had not crashed at the end, then Ferrari would have easily outscored Mercedes. So I'm not in a rush to switch Ferrari back to Mercedes, but it's a possible move I could make to squeeze some money into my bank. I could also start moving some C tiers around. Listen, I cannot do anything with Alex Albon in terms of upgrading without first doing something else, apart from getting Pierre Gasly, who's at 9.8 million, after decreasing yet again. I don't think that's something I'm likely to do. I would like to get Hülkenberg in there, but Hülkenberg is at 10.2 million, so in that case, I would have to downgrade something like Ferrari to Mercedes to then upgrade Alex Albon to Nico Hülkenberg. But am I really in a rush of getting rid of my Williams assets when the Williams car is performing this well, especially at a track like Singapore that's really difficult to overtake? The Williams just being twice the width of any other car, it seems like. So I'm not so sure this is something I want to do yet. It's a possibility if I want to get a Haas driver back there, and it's really my only possibility of getting a Haas driver back in there. We then have Zhou Guanyu. Zhou Guanyu, I was always expecting to buy Bottas. That's what I said in my transfer plans and my team selection video last week. It's just that the engine switch for Zhou Guanyu ended up giving him a penalty, which made me prefer him over Bottas. Now, he did look faster than Bottas, but I don't know if that's something that's going to continue. I guess we'll see, but I could just get Valtteri Bottas in there if I prefer him. Valtteri Bottas is now actually cheaper than Zhou Guanyu by 0.1 million. So that's technically a downgrade now, which is kind of crazy to say. But, that's how quick it can go in Fantasy Formula 1. One good weekend and, it's a 0.6 million swing, and that's sometimes enough to switch the value of a couple of assets. What I'm more likely to do, though, is to wait and see how good Ferrari look, right? If Ferrari look like they're going to be strong in Singapore again, like they were last year, I'm still unlikely to get rid of Lando Norris here, but I could end up switching Piastri to either a Charles Leclerc. They are now the same price once again, so that's just a sideways switch, one move, easy. Or I could end up getting Carlos Sainz if I want to get some budget in there and maybe go up to a Magnussen type deal. That is how I could do it, because Carlos Sainz decreased in price 0.5 million after the crash with Checo and is now at 22.7 million, which is a B tier. Now, I haven't mentioned it so far this video, but both Charles Leclerc and Oscar Piastri increased to an A tier asset. They are now not going to increase much, at most 1.1 or 0.2 million in any given race. So they're not really options for budget gain anymore. Not that budget gain is that important, but I could go for Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz did win here last year, so if the Ferrari look really, really strong, I could do this, and at that point I could upgrade the Zhou Guanyu to a Nico Hülkenberg. So you see how I can use two transfers here, get Carlos Sainz as my second B tier or second premium driver, and then get Hülkenberg with double Williams. I think this looks likely to be the best C tier lineup, where Williams, Haas is really the only thing that I'm looking to target. The RB looks useless, the Alpine looks useless, the Sauber is only in there because they're cheap. So I wouldn't even touch Yuki, Ricardo, Gasly, or Ocon anymore. So these Haas assets and the Williams assets seem to be the way to go. And getting Carlos Sainz in here with this team does look pretty good. Now, do I want to get rid of Oscar Piastri or not have Charles Leclerc if they're looking likely to win it? Not particularly. And making this move also makes me unable to switch Carlos Sainz to one of those drivers on a final fix. But if I'm final fixing them, I'm likely to do it in the 2x spot. So this team works kind of well in lining up a good 2x switch if Lando Norris does not get pole. I think if Lando Norris were to get like third, fourth, fifth, somewhere along that route, and I think that the pole sitter, if that's Piastri, is going to win, I could 2x switch to Piastri and take that, or I could 2x switch to Leclerc if Leclerc's on pole, and I think Leclerc's going to win it. So there's still options for switching the 2x with the final fix, and very much so I would be more likely to do it if Lando Norris did not start at the very, very back of the grid. Now, Singapore is even more difficult to overtake, so I don't know how likely I am to do that, but all the final fix stuff we'll discuss after the qualifying on Saturday to see if there's anything, any opportunity to do so. As for Carlos Sainz, the only real switch I could do here is down to George Russell, if George Russell has a really good qualifying, or up to Checo at 23 million. So it's not like Carlos Sainz is unfinal fixable when upgrading Hülkenberg, but this just looks good, right? And I don't know if Carlos Sainz is going to be that good, but if Ferrari are good enough, and Carlos did win here last year, Carlos could be a good sort of differential. He's not that highly owned among strategists that are invested, so it could be a cheeky budget increase, a cheeky sort of punt for one race, not even on the 2x, to also get Nico Hülkenberg in there over one of my Sauber assets. So I'm looking at this. It's definitely an option. This also keeps me at 1 free transfer saved, which is really, really good. And I would recommend you to also look to save a transfer in Singapore so that you have 3 available in Kota. Kota is a sprint race. It's in 3 weeks' time. There's Red Bull upgrades. A lot can happen. You might not want a wild card if you want to do the 3x. So there are things that could happen in Kota that would make me, not want to use wildcard, and a lot of us don't even have wildcard anymore. So having 3 transfers available in Kota feels really, really important, especially since it's so long. It's basically a fall break. It's as long as the summer break was between Singapore and Kota. So having 3 transfers feels really, really important. I'm very, very unlikely to use all 3 of them. So I'm either doing something like this, getting Carlos Sainz in if Ferrari look really strong, or I just do like a single switch here, maybe switch Shogun Yu to Valtteri Bottas if Valtteri Bottas look to be the faster of the 2. So these are the 2 transfers I'm likely to make. I don't think I'm removing Norris anytime soon, even though, he qualified worse than Piastri, and Piastri looked to challenge him in any given race. I said that at Zandvoort, I got Piastri in instead of Lando Norris, and Lando Norris had the best race of the season. Had his best race of the season, both, on track and F1 fantasy-wise. So I don't think I'm removing Lando Norris anytime soon. I still think he is the number 1 driver in that team, and he needs to start winning to actually take the fight to Max Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship. So I think if Lando Norris is first, I don't think Piastri is going to have the option from the team to even challenge him. So I'm going to keep Lando Norris from now, very likely. But, anything can happen. We could get to Singapore and it turns out McLaren's awful. I mean, Red Bull were the best team on the grid last year in every race but Singapore. And, you could see those issues form even in free practice. So if McLaren looked to struggle, I could boom just switch McLaren out. But no matter what I end up doing here, I think I'm not using 3 transfers. Like, say McLaren come out the park and they look really, really slow and look to be the 4th fastest team for some reason. The 2 switches could be this and this, right? And then, it hurts to not do this, but I'd rather actually keep, I think this could even be a Magnus, and no, Magnus is 12.6. I can barely not afford Magnus in here, but you get what I'm saying. Like, I wouldn't do the 3rd switch here to get Nico Hülkenberg in, because I want to keep my transfer for Kota. And even then, this doesn't look that great because I'm triple dipping. I talked about that a lot in my deadline stream this Saturday, that you should really look to double or triple up on teams and not spread your funds around to try and get the maximum points possible. And that definitely worked this race with triple McLaren. So that was a very, very unlikely scenario where McLaren are bad. I don't think McLaren's going to be bad. I think they're going to still be up there. They look so good when it comes to just keeping those tires alive later on in the stints. So very likely to stick with a triple or double McLaren lineup. This Oscar Piastri could be switched to a Ferrari driver if Ferrari look fast and look to challenge them. Shogun Yu is likely to become a Bottas if Bottas look to be better than Shogun Yu. And if I end up getting downgrading to a B-tier asset on either front, then the Shogun Yu asset could become Nico Hülkenberg. And that's about it. That's what I'm likely to do. If you have any questions regarding your teams, leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. I'm usually pretty good at answering comments when they, pop in for the first day or so. Don't forget to pop into the deadline stream on Saturday, and don't miss the other videos that's coming to this channel shortly. Subscribe so you don't miss any of them. Join the Discord down below. Join the Twitter. Follow the Twitter. I tweet about things happening live there. So thank you so much for watching. Leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you later on in the week. Goodbye.